The thief stood frozen over my strongbox with the parchment in her gloved hands, and the snow came down around her like the world holding its breath. My name is Ricard. I died in another world as a lawyer, and a goddess in a golden nowhere sent me here with one gift. Any contract I sign cannot be broken. 2 years of that gift had turned a starving village into a town of 2,000, unmade a viscount, and put a royal invitation on my table. And tonight it had emptied a strongbox of its coin and left, for a thief nobody could catch, the only thing I had that was worth stealing: an open offer. The yard lanterns came up all at once, because my captain does not believe in coincidence even when it's on our side. Dane's night watch stood in a wide, calm ring, crossbows low, nobody shouting. And I came out into the snow in my dressing gown and slippers, carrying nothing but an ink pot and a pen, because I'd been waiting up for 3 nights and I refused to negotiate underdressed twice. Up close she was younger than her reputation. Hood-soaked, chin high, eyes violet and furious, doing the arithmetic of exits like a professional. The locks were oiled, she said, accusation in it. The good wagon left unguarded. The coin moved and that page left in its place. What is this? I uncapped the ink. A job offer, I said. The interview went well. She didn't sign that night. She ran because running had kept her alive a long time, and my watch on my standing orders let the ring open and watched her vanish over the wall like smoke. Dane looked at me the way he does when I confuse him on purpose. "You'll not catch that one twice," he said. I told him I didn't intend to catch her at all. The parchment had gone over the wall with her. When someone carries your offer away instead of dropping it in the snow, the negotiation isn't over. It has just adjourned. And then Luck, my quiet business partner, got to work. Not on her, around her. The fence in Fairwater who bought stolen goods happened to be arrested the week she needed him. The rooming house that asked no questions happened to burn its kitchen and clothes. Every road she took that month, I am told, was strangely thick with Asheville wagons, Asheville soap, Asheville amber. The smell of the restaurant drifting from a rest-stop kitchen freed folk who fed strangers without asking why. My town had grown wide enough that a person running in circles kept landing in it. On the 9th day of the new year, she walked through my gate in daylight, hood down, and half the square stopped to look, because none of us had ever seen anyone like her. Long dark red hair, violet eyes, the posture of a throne room wearing the cloak of a ditch. She put the parchment on the contract table under the eave and said, "If I sign, I want one clause added. You never ask where I learned my manners." I added the clause in my own hand. She read the whole page twice, the way people read who have been ambushed by documents before, and then she signed in a careful, disguised script that still couldn't help being beautiful. "Vera," the page said. I watched the ink shimmer blue over a name I already knew was false, and the chime rang anyway, soft and certain, because the blessing binds the soul, not the spelling. Ding. She flinched at nothing, the way she always did in those first weeks, and I pretended not to notice, the way I always would. 21 points. My birthday had come and gone again. Even my patience was compounding now. She took a room over the soapworks and a post nobody quite defined, and inside a month the whole town had quietly decided she'd always been there. She sorted trade papers with Camel and corrected her Varan tariff terms without explaining how she knew them. She tasted Laurie's new dishes and named the spice blends of 3 foreign courts without explaining that either. She moved through a crowded market like a blade through silk. An old Aldering, visiting on compact business, kissed her hand entirely by reflex and then looked confused about why he'd done it. My household watched all this with enormous interest. My wives watched it with a certain amount of meaningful eyebrow. And Vera watched everything, always, from the corner of every room, the way you watch when you have spent years expecting the door to come in. The royal invitation gleamed on my desk through all of it, and preparations for the capital consumed my house like a cheerful war. 3 weeks' ride. An audience with King Aldous II. Kali appointed herself field marshal of my education and drilled me nightly in forms of address, orders of precedence, which bow goes to a duke and which to a chamberlain, and I absorbed it the way I absorb everything that isn't law, which is to say badly, at speed, with complaints. I addressed a footstool as your grace. I bowed to Kali at an angle she described as an insult in 4 kingdoms. My father laughed so hard at one rehearsal he had to leave the hall. It was Vera who ended the comedy. She watched 2 evenings from her corner, arms folded, jaw tightening at my footwork the way Grums does at bad ironwork, and on the 3rd evening she crossed the hall, moved Kali gently aside and rebuilt my bow from the floor up in 4 sentences. Wait here. Eyes there. Pause on the second beat because the pause is where the respect lives. It was the correction of someone who had not learned the court but had been built by it, and the whole room heard it. Kali's eyes went bright and thoughtful over her needlework. I said nothing because I'd signed a clause. But from that night the lessons were hers, and my manners, I am told, became briefly and suspiciously excellent. We left for the capital in the first week of spring, a modest column with immodest cargo. Camel, because the crown's invitation had mentioned the frontier's famous ledgers. Kali, because courts are her mother tongue. Dane and 6 of his best, polished to parade shine and hating it. And Vera, listed on the rolls as a clerk of trade, riding with her hood up and her eyes reading every mile marker like a returning ghost. Laurie stayed to rule the town's stomach and Sam its walls, and my father stood on the gate with Marin, the 2 of them looking so thoroughly in charge that I almost stayed home. 3 weeks of road. The last time I traveled 3 weeks in this world, I did it to buy grain with a wagon of hope. This time I brought samples. 3 weeks of road is a long time to learn a traveling party. Dane's 6 polished soldiers spent the first week pretending they weren't excited, and the second week openly buying souvenirs at every crossroads shrine. Camel audited the toll gates as we passed through them, out of pure reflex, and found 2 of them cheating, and left both tollkeepers with corrected arithmetic and existential dread. At the inns, Vera always took the seat facing the door. Always. I started arriving early to leave it free for her, and never mentioned it. And she never mentioned that I never mentioned it, and that was our whole friendship for a while, a quiet arrangement of chairs. Laurie had packed the wagons like a woman provisioning a siege, and every 3rd evening the party ate something out of a sealed crock that made professional soldiers go misty. She'd also, I discovered a week out, hidden a jar of squid ink in my document chest, labeled fish sauce because traditions matter. Kali used the road evenings to finish my education, and the last lesson wasn't manners at all. The capital will read you before you speak, she said, watching the fire. So decide what they read. Aldrich's kind wins the moment you pretend to be one of them. Be the frontier, plainly and well. Mud, contracts, and results. Make them come to you. The capital of Corvin announces itself an hour before you reach it, first as a smudge of smoke, then as a crown of walls, then as a noise. 80,000 souls. Marble government quarters and timber slums shoulder to shoulder, stained glass over open sewers, banners of 50 noble houses fighting for wind on the same towers. My frontier soldiers rode through the gates like men entering a legend. Camel counted, out loud, involuntarily, everything. And I watched Vera pull her hood a fraction lower with every street, watched her know the shortcuts without looking, watched her flinch once at a wall where old proclamations hung in rags, and I filed it all, the way you file clauses you don't yet understand. The audience came on the 3rd day, in a throne hall built to shrink visitors, all marble and stained glass and a ceiling like a captured sky. King Aldous II was older than his portraits and more tired than his seals, an iron-gray man on an iron-gray throne, and he looked at me down the whole length of that terrible carpet the way a chess player looks at an unfamiliar piece. I performed Vera's bow. Pause on the second beat. Somewhere behind the throne, a chamberlain's eyebrows conceded a point. So, said the king of Corvin, the baron of paper, they tell me you unmade Lionearth with a confession and 4 seals. My magistrates have been trying for 10 years. I said the magistrates lacked the advantage of good witnesses. He said most men who did his work for him wanted something. I said I was a simple frontier lord. He laughed for the first time, they told me later, in months, and the sound echoed off all that marble like a door unlocking. We talked for an hour past the schedule, to the visible agony of the chamberlain. Trade, roads, the frontier compact, the arithmetic of feeding towns. He asked real questions, the kind that have numbers in the answers, and Camel, summoned forward, answered with the ledgers until the king of Corvin was leaning over de Balentry columns like a student. This is the thing nobody tells you about kings. They are starving, all of them, for one conversation that isn't a performance. When it ended, he granted Asheville a royal trade charter, market rights on crown roads, and his private seal on the compact's legality, and he did it with the relish of a man spending money that annoys his enemies. "You'll make enemies here within the week," he told me at the door, pleasantly, like a weather report. He was wrong. It took 2 days. We took a rented house in the merchant quarter, and the capital came to inspect us like a new animal at a menagerie. Camel vanished into the royal archives on day 2 with a letter of access, and had to be retrieved at closing bell, glowing, having found tax rolls dating back a century, which is to her what a dragon's hoard is to a dragon. Dane's soldiers became briefly famous in the neighborhood taverns for being from the town that broke Lionearth, and told the story worse every night to bigger crowds. And every week, without fail, a food crate arrived from home by fast courier, sealed in wax, packed by Laurie, with a note about which parcel was for which of us, and a standing threat about what she'd cook for me if I came home thin. I wrote home constantly, to Laurie honestly, to my father briefly, soldier to quartermaster, to Sam officially addressed to the militia commander, and his replies came back addressed to the corps, currently abroad and contained under all the insults, drill reports of astonishing precision. Iska wrote once a season, 4 lines, everything running, nobody hungry, 2 new families, don't worry. I read those 4 lines more times than any contract in that city. Count Aldrich of Corvin owned the Eastern trade concessions, 3 generations deep. Old money, old name, a face like a well-kept knife, and a talent, refined over decades, for making the law do the robbing. Every crate that moved east had paid his houses a toll since before I was born in either world. And here came a frontier baron with a royal charter, market rights, cheaper soap, better spirits, and ledgers that made his accounting look like cave painting. We met exactly once that first week, at a reception under someone's chandeliers. He congratulated me on my quaint successes in the provinces. I congratulated him on the durability of his family's arrangements. We understood each other completely, immediately, and with a certain professional regard. It was the most honest conversation I would ever have in that city. The siege began politely, the way sieges do among people with clean hands. The Eastern guilds, all of whom owed Aldrich their concessions, discovered sudden difficulties with Asheville goods. Warehouse space evaporated. Toll schedules sprouted new categories with our cargo's exact description. A dock inspection that took other merchants an hour took our wagons 9 days, and the paperwork came back with a new error each time, and each error was small and legal and exquisite. Camel sat in our rented house surrounded by rejection documents, glasses up in her hair, and pronounced it with real admiration, the finest defensive bookkeeping she'd ever seen. Then came the whisper campaign because Aldrich fought with both hands. In the salons, delivered as concern. Frontier baron, jumped-up soap peddler, private army on the border, sealed compacts with 4 lords, and had anyone else noticed how conveniently his rivals kept sickening? A word began attaching itself to my luck in fashionable mouths, and the word was unnatural. Let me show you one day of the siege so you can taste it. Our wagons reach the east dock at dawn. An inspector in a clean coat discovers the manifests are stamped in blue and this dock, as of Tuesday, requires black. We restamp. A second inspector discovers the wagons exceed a new axle weight rule by the weight of approximately 1 apple. We repack. A third discovers the first 2 inspectors lack jurisdiction and everything must be reinspected. And by now the ice houses have closed and the perishables have perished politely, legally, expensively. Dane watched the whole ballet with his hand nowhere near his sword, which for Dane is a philosophical achievement. "Give me one wall," he said wistfully, "and one honest siege." I told him this was the honest kind. Every crime was documented. They were documenting them for me themselves. The salons were the other front. I attended exactly enough of them to be seen unbothered, and the whispers reached me on schedule, delivered by acquaintances with the sorrowful faces people wear when they're enjoying themselves. Jumped-up peddler, private army, unnatural luck. At the third soirée, a perfumed viscount asked me silkily whether it was true that I owed my fortune to dark bargains, and the room went quiet on cue, and I said yes, absolutely. I had signed contracts with dozens of desperate souls, and the terms were terrible. Food, wages, and a roof, in exchange for honest work. The silence curdled into laughter at his expense, not mine. The next morning I sent him a gift basket of Asheville white with a card reading, "For the removal of stains." Collie framed the reply he didn't send. And in the middle of that whisper campaign, a letter with familiar handwriting reached Aldrich's secretary, though I wouldn't learn it for months. Premier. My exiled stepmother, keeping bees and grudges at her convent estate, had been writing to anyone who might hurt me, and Aldrich's people had found her. What she knew was old, but it was intimate. The manners, habits. My squid ink shipments, which she'd always found strange. The names of the freed, nothing fatal, everything useful. Some thorns you pull, and some you leave because pulling costs more than they take, and I had left her alive on purpose and would do it again. But I want you to know the account was still open, because everything in this city was about to become arithmetic. Collie handled the Premier problem the way Collie handles everything, invisibly and completely. Once we traced the letters, she did not expose my stepmother. She wrote to her. One page, warm as a hearth and twice as dangerous, mentioning how well the convent's honey sold in Asheville's market these days, how fondly the household spoke of her bees, and how very much correspondence a quiet estate seemed to generate. No threat anywhere on the page. Premier, who could read the space between words better than the words, understood her mail had become a known quantity, and from that month her letters to Aldrich's secretary reported, with perfect accuracy, things we did not mind him knowing. A tamed leak is worth 10 stopped ones. Collie taught me that. I've stopped asking where she learned it. We fought back my way, quietly on paper through the one network nobody watched. For 2 years Camel had trained visiting clerks in her double entry method, 2 silver a head, and those clerks now kept books in 40 houses across the kingdom, including, as it happened, 3 of Aldrich's guilds. Nobody spies for us. I want that understood, but bookkeeping has a physics. When a guild refuses profitable cargo, the whole shows in the ledger and clerks write to their old teacher about interesting problems, and my wife reads her correspondence very carefully. By high summer, Camel could draw Aldrich's whole siege on one sheet of paper, every pressured guild, every invented toll, every warehouse standing empty at his word and losing money doing it. He was spending 3 coins to cost us 1. "He's bleeding," she said, tapping the sheet. "He's just bleeding somewhere the salons can't see. Hold." So we held, and while we held, the city itself started doing our arguing. Asheville white was simply better soap, and the capital's laundresses knew it before the capital's lords did. Asheville amber moved through back doors of establishments whose front doors displayed Aldrich's licenses. Our one permitted market stall had queues that bent around the block, and every toll and delay Aldrich invented made the queues longer, because nothing in any world sells like the thing somebody important doesn't want you to have. I stood at that stall some mornings and sold soap with my own hands, frontier style, and the crowd treated it like theater. The Whisper campaign called me a peddler dressed as a baron. I sent the whisperers a gift basket. Then the fever came off the docks, and everything else stopped mattering. It started in the river quarter, the way it always does, where the city is dampest and the crown is furthest. Then it jumped the water. The court physicians prescribed vinegar masks and closed windows and the burning of aromatic herbs, and the death carts got busier anyway, and the salons emptied inland, and the King's Council debated sealing the poor quarters entirely, which is the polite term for writing off everyone inside. I had spent my skill points that week already. I spent the next batch on the shop's medical shelf, and what came back was nothing this world lacked the materials for: boiled water, soap, clean linen, salt and sugar in water for the dying, quarantine drawn around the sick, not the poor, knowledge so cheap it was almost embarrassing and worth more than every jewel in that city. The crown's physicians would not hear it from a frontier baron, so I didn't tell the crown. I told the laundresses. I told the dock foreman who already bought our soap, and the tavern keepers who watered our amber, and I hired the river quarter's own people at posted wages on contracts to boil water in the soapworks vats and carry it street by street with clean linen and instructions. Vera worked those streets beside me, sleeves rolled, hood down, cool and steady among the dying, and I learned something watching her that no claws had told me. She had done this before. Somewhere, sometime, she had stood in a sick street organizing water and linen with exactly this calm, and when a dying old woman grabbed her hand and called her a blessed lady, something in her face broke and mended in the same second. The fever curve bent inside 3 weeks. The river quarter counted its dead in dozens while the physician's quarter, windows sealed, vinegar masks and all, counted its own in scores. The soapworks vats of the river quarter became the strangest industry I ever founded. Fires burning day and night under cauldrons of plain water. Carriers with yoked buckets and clean linen walking assigned streets on posted rounds. Wages nailed to the boiling house door. Every carrier under contract, because a contract meant fate itself was invested in their rounds being completed. Say what you like about my methods. My water carts never once broke an axle. We chalked the doctrine on walls in simple words. Boil it. Wash it. Boiled water only for the sick. Salt and sugar in water, spoon by spoon, for the ones too far gone to eat, and that humble syrup pulled more people back from the edge than every physician in the marble quarter. The physicians did come, eventually in their vinegar masks, to shut us down. A delegation of them, robes and credentials, informing me the boiling houses spread the miasma by encouraging the poor to congregate. I did not argue theory. I am not qualified, and neither, though it was impolitic to say, were they. I handed them the street tallies instead, laundress kept, day by day, sick and dead, our quarter against theirs, and invited them to check the arithmetic. They left with the tallies. One of them, the youngest, came back the next night without his mask and asked quietly how the syrup was mixed. I gave him everything, wrote him a copy by hand. His name is worth remembering. Dr. Ellis. You build a new world one defector at a time. There was a morning in the worst week when a laundress pulled me into a doorway to show me a child who had turned the corner overnight, a little boy asleep with his fever broken, and his mother holding a cup of that ridiculous sugar water like a relic. Vera stood in the doorway watching them with an expression I'd never seen her wear, and in the street after, she said, mostly to herself, I spent 6 years learning what people do to each other. She looked back at the door. I'd forgotten there was a second list. I didn't answer. Some testimony you don't interrupt. The city noticed. The court could ignore soap and spirits, but the capital's own streets now told a story in which the frontier barons' people had walked toward the fever while the fashionable ran from it, and the queues at our stall turned into something closer to congregations. The king summoned me to ask what I'd done and why it worked. I gave him boiled water and germ doctrine, plainly, the way I'd give evidence, and I watched the tired old man do what Aldrich's faction never did. He believed the results over the theory on the spot and ordered the method for the army. Aldous II earned my loyalty in that room, not as a subject, as a professional. Show me a man who changes his mind when the numbers come in, and I will show you a man worth working for. Aldrich read the same city and understood he was losing it, and desperate money stops being subtle. The pressured guilds began breaking his line one by one because Camel's sheet had been right and their ledgers couldn't take the bleeding. His toll categories were quietly struck by clerks who had queued at our stall themselves. So he went to the only table he had left, the one his family had owned for 3 generations. The law, formal charges, laid before the crown with full ceremony. Fraud in the frontier charters, market manipulation through unnatural means, and the blade under the silk, that the frontier compact, 4 lords bound by private oath with a drilled army, constituted conspiracy against the crown's monopoly on force. Treason dressed for court. The penalty was everything. Title, lands, the compact dissolved, and the gallows on the table if the king wished it there. The salons, which had been drifting toward my stall like everyone else, snapped back to him overnight, because whatever else the salons are, they attend hangings. I sat with the charge sheet a long evening alone, the way I used to sit with case files in another life, and I will be honest with you, because this account is nothing if I lie in it. I was afraid, not of losing the argument, of the ground itself. In my old world the law was a floor you stood on, however cracked. Here the law was Aldrich's family furniture, and the courtroom was his house, and the judge wore a crown I'd known for one season. Then Kali sat down across from me and said the thing that turned the fear useful. "He has made one mistake already," she said. "He has agreed to fight you in the only room in this kingdom where the furniture doesn't vote. Aldous will judge this himself. Make the king your jury, and Aldrich has chosen the one venue he cannot buy." The week before trial, the capital treated my hanging as the season's entertainment. The betting books ran odds in the salons, and I am reliably informed the smart money was on Aldrich at 3-1, with a side market on whether the compact lords would abandon me, which is where the smart money lost its shirt, because Hertz, Wick, and Aldering answered the treason charge by riding to the capital together, uninvited, to sit in my gallery in full baronial regalia. Wick's entire statement to the salons was, "We read what we sign." Aldering's was longer and mostly about his grandfather. Hertz just sat behind me like a fur-covered mountain range. You can buy advocates. You cannot buy 3 stubborn old men on benches. Camel prepared for that trial the way generals prepare for weather. She built the evidence sheet in 7 drafts, rehearsed handing me each document until the choreography ran without eyes, and interviewed both guild masters until their confessions were bricklaying plain fact on plain fact. The night before, she finally set down her pen, took off her glasses, and said the only thing she said all evening that wasn't logistics. "In Fairwater, you saved my father with their own charter." She put the 7-draft sheet in my hands like a blade being passed. "Do it to him." The trial filled the throne hall past standing. 50 noble houses came to watch the frontier upstart hang or the old money stumble, banners and silks packed to the stained glass, and the king sat that iron throne with the face of a man who intended to enjoy exactly one thing about a tedious day. Aldrich's advocates opened for 3 hours, and they were good. Parchment towers, precedent stacked on precedent. The compact read aloud in a tone that made mutual aid sound like sedition, my luck retold as manipulation, my charters as forgeries of process. Vera sat in our gallery with her hood back, that day of all days, still as a portrait, and I did not yet know what it cost her to sit bareheaded in a royal hall. When they finished, the hall was persuaded. You could feel it the way a room leans. The king looked at me down all that marble. "Baron, answer." I stood and I did not answer. I asked. It's the oldest trick I own and the only one that has never once failed me. I asked Aldrich's own advocate to read aloud the Crown statute on private armies, the actual text, which nobody in 3 hours had done, and the hall discovered together that the statute forbids armed compact against the Crown, and that the compact's first clause, drafted by a paranoid frontier lawyer 2 winters ago for exactly this room, pledges the signatories' arms to the Crown's defense, first, always, above each other. I asked him to read the charter fraud particulars and made him confirm, item by item, that every seal was the king's own, that fraud in them would be fraud by the Crown's own chancery. I asked whether his client wished to formally accuse the chancery. The advocate looked at Aldrich. Aldrich studied the stained glass. The hall began, very quietly, to enjoy itself. Then I called my only witness, and it was a ledger. Camel walked the king through one sheet of paper, the siege drawn in numbers, the tolls invented for one baron's goods and struck for others, the warehouses ordered empty at a loss, the guild instructions in Aldrich's secretary's hand, sworn to by two guild masters who had broken his line and preferred confession to bankruptcy. Market manipulation was the charge on my sheet, and my wife proved it off theirs, and she did it in the flat, kind voice of a teacher, which was somehow worse for him than fury. And when Aldrich's advocate, drowning, reached for the last plank and demanded to know how the court could trust the famous luck of Asheville, whether the kingdom was to believe fate itself signs for the baron, I finally gave the hall its theater. I said fortune, like the court, favors whoever files first, and the king of Corvin laughed out loud on his own throne, and that sound was the verdict, and every soul under that captured sky knew it. Aldous ruled from the throne without recessing. Charges dismissed with prejudice, which is the law's way of saying don't come back. The invented tolls examined. The concessions, 3 generations old, opened to review by the chancery Aldrich had nearly accused of forgery. He kept his head and his title and lost the thing his family had actually owned, which was the assumption that the law belonged to them. I watched him receive it standing, correct to the last inch, and I will give him this. He took ruin like a nobleman. On the steps afterward, in front of enough witnesses to matter, he stopped and looked at me with that well-kept knife face and said, "You'll want my eastern warehouses. They'll be for sale by winter." Even his surrenders were priced. I bought 3 of them. Salons flipped overnight, because salons are weather vanes with jewelry. The same mouths that had whispered peddler now competed to have discovered me first. Invitations arrived by the tray. I declined them identically, with courteous notes and a small cake of Asheville white enclosed, which the fashionable world decided was rustic wit and made into a fad, and for one deranged month the capital's finest houses gifted each other soap. Camel raised prices twice. The betting books, I'm told, paid out ruinously. Somewhere in a counting house, a man who had wagered on me at 3-1 bought his wife a townhouse, and I like to think of him sometimes, my one honest disciple. What followed was the strangest season of my 2 lives. We had come to the capital to survive an invitation. We left it, months on, holding a trade charter, warehouses on the East Road, a soap congregation, the Crown's medical contract, and the fashionable world's fickle, ferocious love. Asheville itself, when we finally rode home to it in the gold of early autumn, had crossed 20,000 souls, swollen by every road, no longer a town at all. From the last hill it looked like what it had become, a young city with concrete bones going into its new walls, pale ramparts rising over the autumn plains exactly as I'd drawn them, because I had been buying Roman concrete from the shop's 4th tier and mailing my mason's instructions like a man possessed. Ding! The gates were taller than I remembered. The noise was better than I remembered. Home had gotten too big to hug, and I tried anyway. Home, let me walk you through what 20,000 looks like, because I still get lost in the sentence. The pale concrete ramparts, Grum's apprentices, all 9 of them now, giving wall tour with proprietary swagger. 5 named districts. A market that runs 6 days a week and a bell that rings noon so the whole city eats at once. Laurie's idea, obviously. The restaurant is 3 restaurants. The school bench is a schoolhouse with a bell of its own. The soapworks ships to 11 towns, and the amber cellar has a waiting list with 2 barons on it. And at the gate, unchanged, the contract table under its eave, inkwell full, where Iska still reads every new arrival, every clause, though these days she trains others to do it too. Some things scale. The important thing is choosing which. My 21st birthday landed in the middle of the homecoming feast, and the city made it a festival I couldn't walk across in an hour. 21 mismatched candles on a cake the size of a wagon wheel, because Laurie scales tradition without mercy. Ding. Age 21. Contract yield increased. 21 points per signature now, and a city generating signatures faster than I could read them. My father gave the toast again, 3rd year running, and this year he didn't manage to finish it, and nobody minded, and Sam of all people stood up into the silence, raised his cup at me and said, "To the corpse," Healthiest dead man I ever met. 20,000 people laughed. I have received knighthoods worth less. Ding, Tier 4 unlocked, the box announced that week, over a city that had crossed every threshold I'd once written on a slate as fantasy. The catalog opened on wonders with real weight now. Engineering, medicine, the concrete I'd already been mailing home. And I noticed, scrolling in the dark with the old hunger, that the shop had begun organizing itself around what my people needed before I searched for it. Roads before jewels, granaries before glory, and I asked Seraphy if the catalog was reading my ledgers. "The catalog," she said, with her gentlest smugness, "reads you. I bought a hospital's worth of medicine and went asleep read." The homecoming feast lasted 2 days, and the accounting of it made Camel physically ill with joy. Somewhere in the middle of it, between Laurie's fourth course and Sam's demonstration of capital manners, which consisted of bowing to a footstool, my whole family under one roar of a roof, I looked across the hall and caught Vera in the doorway, half in, half out, watching us the way she'd watched everything since the night of the strongbox. Hungry and certain she wasn't allowed. I know that posture. I died in it. So I did the only thing I have ever known how to do about it. I walked over with 2 cups and no questions and stood in the doorway with her on her side of it, and after a while she took the cup, and after a longer while, so quietly I nearly missed it over the feast, she said, "My name isn't Vera." I said, "I know. I never asked." And she laughed once like something cracking open and didn't tell me and stayed. After the doorway, something in Vera came off its guard by degrees, and my household, which absorbs people the way bread absorbs honey, went to work on her without appearing to. Laurie taught her to make dumplings and lost the lesson laughing when it emerged that Vera folded them into perfect little courtly parcels, too beautiful to boil. She and Camel developed a fierce weekly card game using a Varen deck Vera produced from nowhere, and I watched my wife the auditor lose 4 weeks running to a woman who counted cards in 2 languages and enjoy it. And one evening, a traveling singer in the market played an old Western lullaby, and Vera stopped mid-street just for a breath, just long enough for me to see the girl who'd heard it first. She caught me seeing. She didn't hood her eyes. Progress in this house is measured small. I should have been watching my counting room instead of the doorway. Odo had come back with Toburn's autumn caravan, neat and gray and thorough, copying manifests for his master's records the way he had for 2 years. But the capital season had changed what passed through my books: warehouse deeds on the East Road, the Crown's medical contracts, and the private ledger of the household, where a clerk of trade named Vera drew wages, dated to the 9th day of the new year, in a hand I'd watched disguise itself on a signature line. Odo copied everything. Everything went to his master's records, and then, for a second fee I knew nothing about, everything went somewhere west. I built a city on the discipline of writing things down, and it never once occurred to me that the discipline could be aimed back. Odo sat in my counting room that same season, copying. I can see the picture now with a clarity that costs me sleep. The neat gray coat, the good hand, the lodging papers I'd signed myself, 2 years of trust compounding like everything else I build. He copied the warehouse deeds. He copied the medical contracts. And on an afternoon when the room was loud with honest business, he copied the household wage roll, and somewhere on that page, dated the 9th day of the year, was a clerk of trade who had appeared from nowhere with red hair and violet eyes. He blotted the page carefully. He always blotted. Thoroughness is a virtue, which is exactly why it sells so well. The first sign was small, the way the worst things are. A pale man at the amber stall who paid full price and asked friendly questions about the household. A peddler mapping the new walls with his eyes while his cart sold nothing. Dane's people watched them watch us and sent me reports I read too slowly because I was busy being happy. It was Vera who read the city right. Vera, who had spent years listening for one particular kind of footstep, came to my study on a night of first frost, closed the door and stood very straight, and I watched her decide something that cost more than I could then measure. "The men asking questions are Varen," she said. I know how they ask because they've been asking about me for 6 years. I should have told you before I signed. My name is Verena, and if they've found me, everyone under your roof is standing too close." She told me all of it that night in the study with the frost on the glass, in the voice of someone laying out a case file on themselves. Her father, a murdered Duke in Vera, the rightful line, a usurper's bloody accounting 6 years old, a daughter smuggled out by a dying steward, 6 years of ditches and false names and never twice the same city, all of it converging on the one fact that mattered to the man on Vera's stolen throne. She existed. She was proof. Malric had killed his way to a crown, and she was the last living evidence the crown wasn't his. And kings like that do not stop, and everyone who had ever sheltered her had paid for it. And that, she said, chin high, eyes level, that was why she'd only ever signed a false name, and why she would be gone by morning, and why I should burn her contract and forget the clause in the doorway and all of it. She had it all argued. It was a good case. I have heard many. I let her finish because you always let them finish. Then I took her contract from the strong room and put it on the desk between us next to her locket, which she'd set down like a surrendered weapon, and I did not burn anything. I pointed at the protection clause. His personally in writing. "This page doesn't know your name," I said. "It never needed it. It binds me to you, not to your spelling. You've been running on your own luck for 6 years. As your employer, I am formally instructing you to try mine." And for the first time since the snow and the strongbox, Verena, daughter of a murdered duke, terror of my locksmiths, sat down in a chair like her strings had been cut and put her face in her hands and let somebody else hold the door. We moved her that week to a safe house in the city, quietly 3 streets from the walls, watched by Dane's best until I could draft something worthy of the problem. Fate enforces my signatures. I went asleep believing that made her safe. Write that down as the most expensive sentence I ever thought. Her last evening in the safe house, I brought the weekly papers myself, and we ate Laurie's parcels at the small table while I laid out my grand design, the drafts of something I'd been building for her problem, packs and papers, and a plan with her freedom at the end of it. She listened with her chin on her hand. And then Verena, daughter of a murdered duke, laughed at one of my jokes, freely, unguarded, first time in 6 years I'd wager, and the sound of it filled that little safe room like sunlight, and I walked home through the frost feeling like the richest man in 2 worlds. I want you to keep that sound. I need one of us to keep it. It was the first hard frost of winter when it happened. She was gone from the safe house before her guards knew the night had teeth. The door hung off its hinges outward, which no thief does. The watchers Dane trusted most were alive, drugged at their posts professionally, which was almost a courtesy, and in the frozen mud of the lane behind the house there was one boot print with a tread I didn't recognize, and Dane did. Military. Varen issue. And beside the boot print, half pressed into the ice, her locket. The one thing she never took off, left where it fell or left to be found. I stood in that lane in the frost with her locket in my fist and did not shout, because somewhere in the last 2 lives I lost the trick of it. The cold did the shouting. And then, for the first time in 3 years, since a golden nowhere and a warm voice and a second chance, the sound I trusted most in any world went wrong. The chime rang, and it was not soft, and the box that unfolded in the frost-bright air was not blue. It was red. Seraph's voice, which had teased me through every exploit and blessed every wedding, said 4 words with no gentleness in them at all. Warning. A contract has been broken. The contract lord will return.